On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 1980. We're going to be taking a look at George Jones, and he's going to be performing He Stopped Loving Her Today. Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus, and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. So let's get George up on screen and see how he gets on.
He said, I'll love you till I die. She told me forget time. I watched the years pass slowly by, and she still preyed on his mind. He kept her pictures on his wall. I saw him go half crazy now and then. Oh, but he still loved her through it all, and kept hoping she'd come back again. Found love letters by his bed. Did in 1962. He had underlined in red every single I love you. I went to see my friend today. Oh, but I didn't see no tears. All dressed up to go away. First time I'd seen him smile in years. He stopped loving her. They placed a ring on his door, and soon they'll carry him away. He stopped loving her today. You know, she came back today for her last time. Oh, and we all wondered if she would. And you know, it kept running through my mind. Well, this time, he's over her for good. He stopped loving her today. They placed a wreath upon his door, and soon they'll carry him away. He stopped loving her today.
And there we have it. That is one of those performances and compositions that is so difficult to just jump into, so I thought I'd let it play all the way to the end. If you guys want to watch it all over again, you can do. The link to this video is going to be in the description below, so you can click on that. But George Jones, with his performance, it's such a great example of a dynamic performance from every single perspective, because of the way that the band start up so lightly and just wait for the cue from George at the front of the stage. As you can see, he goes straight into it with the vocal, and then the band just start up. Just to mention that this song was written by Bobby Braddock and Curly Putman, and George, being a prolific songwriter himself, wrote many a hit, not only for himself, but for other artists. But with this composition, the tempo is so laid back. It is such a slow tempo throughout the whole composition. With George's vocal, that is always going to draw you in because of the delivery and that storytelling quality that he has, even going into literally telling the story and just talking and breaking away from the singing for that particular section. The way that he delivers this throughout and the way that the band just start to come in, open up the dynamics a little bit more as we progress through the song is something to listen out for. The change that the pedal steel player is making to the harmonica, just that little change, it makes so much of a difference. Also, the drummer, the way that he controls the dynamics by just giving you a little bit of a hi-hat in the first verse and then a little bit of a rim shot as well on that snare. But then by the time we get into the chorus, he starts to now lean into it a little bit more, and we've got almost that full snare by the end of the song. This is the thing, that when the pedal steel comes in, it just tweaks your ear. It just gives you another sight to see on the journey, but it's not going to detract from that lead vocal. It's not like the pedal steel guitar is going off on one and trying to take that limelight. It is just like another voice that is just sat behind George's voice. And it is so well played across the board here from the whole band, especially when you're talking about this tempo being so laid back. It is something that you have to consciously think about when you are playing at this kind of tempo, not to push it. And more often than not, you will find players and drummers who start to push the tempo. And this is the last thing you want with this composition, because the whole personality of it is in the tempo, because it allows George the time to deliver his vocal and put all of that expression, all of the meaning into the lyrical content so that you can take in what's being said. As soon as you start to speed up your tempo and the beats per minute start raising, then the guy singing has to now fit in the words into a shorter space of time, and you have less time to think about it as an audience member. Whereas this is all about listening to the lyrical content and the delivery that George gives it. It is just classic country. It's all about the delivery and the story of the song. It's so well put together and so well executed that you're not necessarily going to even notice the addition of instruments. And when the harmonica comes in, it's just something that adds to the mix and is interesting. It doesn't detract, it adds. And that is what music is all about, adding to the composition, adding to the performance, and not distracting and taking away. So when that harmonica comes in, it's just a refreshing sight to see something new, but then that turns into pedal steel because it's the same musician doing both of those instruments. The other thing to mention is that George here isn't hitting the strings on his guitar. It's something that it looks like has been set up just for TV, for the aesthetic of watching somebody at the front of the stage play the guitar. But we can't hear any acoustic guitar going on. It's just that pedal steel and also the piano that's in there. Again, it's so subtle but so well put together that you don't really take in all of the instruments that are going on and how well played it is, because George just steals the show at the front of the stage. Just to talk about George's vocal delivery quickly and his range as well, you might not notice that we have over an octave covered here in range that George throws in there, but you're not going to notice it because of the way that he delivers it and his tonal consistency, something that I always mention about the top singers having the same sound to their voice throughout their whole range. And considering that in the verses, we are in and around B2 and around D3 as well. But then when we get into the chorus, the high note is an E4. So starting on a B2 and getting all the way out to an E4, like I said, over an octave and a half, around that kind of ballpark in terms of the notes covered here. But sometimes you'll find that a singer, when they do cover an octave and a half with their vocal range, the top notes are a strain because it is so far for them to reach that top note. But George just has total control of this throughout his whole range. When I mentioned about George not playing the guitar, missing those strings, it's not because he couldn't play the guitar. He got his first guitar when he was 9 years of age, so he was certainly proficient at playing it. It would have just been for TV and probably Just the fact that the microphone might have been picking up the strumming and it might have thrown the mix off, so he was asked to not hit the strings. He is, by the way, playing all of the correct chord shapes with his left hand, just missing the strings with that right hand. Something else to look out for here is the really early key change, because in the first verse we're starting in F sharp, and when we get into the second verse there's a little hitch up to G. So it means that the composition is going to be lifted into that second verse. And the key change is something that would ordinarily happen towards the end of a song. It is something that is used to keep the interest going without changing the overall chord progression. This is one of those songs that I think when George first heard it, he wasn't mad about it. He thought it was too sad and a bit depressing. And when you consider the subject matter of the song, and just to cover it quickly, the name of the song, He Stopped Loving Her Today, he would be loving her his whole life, but the reason he stopped loving her is because he died. And you get that through the lyrical content when they say about him being carried away today. But it's something that I think took a lot of people by surprise when this went straight in to number 1 in the country charts, because George had also been out of the charts, or at least not had a big hit for about 6 years previously. So it just went straight to that number 1 spot and just hit a chord with so many people. I think it is understandable that George, hearing this song for the first time, and when we listen to it now, because it was a huge hit, you see it in a slightly different way. But imagining George hearing this, a song about a guy who's kept all of the old letters and photos of his long-lost love, hoping that she'll return one day, and then she does return, but the only drawback is that he's dead, and she's returning for his funeral. It is a bit dark, and with George singing it, this is the other thing. I think that George, the ability that he had vocally, just gives the story so much more depth and connection than maybe if somebody else had sung it, it just wouldn't have worked. But with George Jones, it certainly did. But I do want to get into George's history briefly in this video as well. Like I said before, he started playing the guitar at age 9, but when he was 7 years of age, his family had a radio and he used to listen to the Grand Ole Opry on that. He was a huge fan of Hank Williams, and when he was 16 years of age, he did leave home and started to sing and perform on local radio stations. Interestingly, he actually got to meet his idol Hank Williams after a radio show that he'd just performed at, and it must have been amazing for him to meet him so early on in his career. It was in 1954 that he recorded his first song called No Money in This Deal, and that would have been when he was 23 years of age. He recorded and released a few other songs as well, but his first hit came in 1955, and that was Why Baby Why, and that got to number 4 in the charts. Through this, he managed to meet and perform with Elvis and Johnny Cash as well, who became a close friend of his. In 1957, he performed a duet with Jeanette Hicks, and that turned into a top 10 hit. That was called Yearning, and he was still playing all the gigs that he could, driving around in his car with his phone number on the side in order to try and promote himself. But his first number 1 hit came in 1959, and that was called White Lightning. And a bit of trivia about that, the recording took 80 vocal takes, or over 80 vocal takes, because unfortunately George was intoxicated at the time. He was a prolific and successful songwriter, not only for himself, but for other artists as well. Johnny Cash was one of those. His songs were covered by so many different artists, the likes of Willie Nelson, Elvis Costello, Loretta Lynn, to name but a few. And in 1962, he released She Thinks I Still Care, and that turned into a monster hit for him again. Pretty much throughout the 1960s, the whole decade, he dominated the country charts. Unfortunately, around 1967 is when George was drinking quite a lot, taking amphetamines as well. He had to go into a neurological hospital in order to get treatment for everything that he was dealing with at that time. And there is the story of His wife at the time, whenever she went out, she would hide the keys to the car so that he couldn't drive to the nearest 7-Eleven or shop to try and get some alcohol. And the lawnmower was still there. And this is something that George saw, and he rode the lawnmower to the nearest convenience store. And I think it was maybe 9 miles in length. So it's quite a long journey to have on a lawnmower that only went 5 miles an hour. But that's what he used in order to get hold of some alcohol. Unfortunately, that marriage didn't last, and George found himself married again in 1969 to Tammy Wynette, and they performed together and toured together, and they were known as Mr. and Mrs. Country Music. They unfortunately divorced in 1976 due to George's increasingly erratic behavior, and in 1974 he released the Grand Tour, and the title track went to #1, another huge hit. In 1976 he released Alone Again, and The Door from that album was another #1 hit. In the late 70s, unfortunately, he spiraled out of control, missing shows. He owed $36,000 in child support. He filed for bankruptcy. And the thing is that when he did turn up to the shows, he stole the show and always got great reviews, but he just wasn't consistent. And then we have this bolt from the blue in 1980. He Stops Loving Her Today was a monster hit. He won a Grammy Award. Also, it was the Country Music Association's Song of the Year in 1980 and 1981, and he then experienced great success. He had a new recording contract, and in the early 80s he had even more hits. I Always Get Lucky With You was one of those, a monster hit getting to #1 in 1984. In 1990 he released You Ought to Be Here With Me, and in 1992 he was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. In 1998 he had his own TV show called The George Jones Show, and that was on the Nashville Network. In 1999 he released Cold Hard Truth, and that had a monster hit of a song on there called Choices, and he won a Grammy for that as well. In 2012 he was awarded with the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award. Sadly, George did pass away in 2013 at the age of 81, and he was one of those artists that was so widely respected within the industry, but also across multiple genres. Because if you look at the names of people that he's inspired and just the fans that he had, you have Frank Sinatra in there, you have Bob Dylan, Keith Richards and Mick Jagger, Robert Plant as well, James Taylor. The list goes on and on for top musicians who were inspired by George Jones. But it's great to have a look back at George in full flow here, performing one of his biggest hits. But thank you guys so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!